Welcome to the Trad Dads podcast, where we examine cultural and political issues through the lens of traditional thought. All right, this is Levi Russell. Thanks for joining me. Today's episode is going to be a response to a few criticisms of what we might call distributism or Catholic social teaching implemented as economic policy that generally comports with what today would be considered a right-wing perspective. And so the criticism is going to come from what would probably be considered the left. We've done plenty of episodes responding to right-wing and libertarian type criticisms. Just scroll through the last 31 episodes. Several of them function that way. But these questions, or these, objections, I guess, are a little different. And they're coming from someone who thinks that democratic socialism or social democracy or whatever euphemism they want to use for highly concentrated, centralized governments, whatever that euphemism is. This is that person. This is the person who basically just thinks that Bernie Sanders' ideas are good ideas, or Elizabeth Warren, just someone who thinks that the only solution to most of our problems comes from the top, from very powerful governments with a lot of centralized power. And so I'm just going to take each of these in turn as they were presented to me from someone on Twitter. And the first one is that this left-winger would say something like, concentrated power has been proven necessary to rein in plutocrats or, capitalists or whatever you want to, whatever phrase you want to use. Probably they would use some kind of Marxist thing, like just referring to them generally as capital, which is really weird. But my first issue with this is the framing is the problem, I think. So what is concentration of power? We need concentrated power to rein in capital, to rein in plutocrats. Gosh, I don't know. What does that mean? Because I think, as it often does, these objections to Catholic social teaching and policy that's consistent with Catholic social teaching ultimately comes down to some kind of misunderstanding of subsidiarity. So, first of all, subsidiarity is not the notion that only the family or the local community should have any power whatsoever. Of course not. That's silly. Things that are appropriate to those higher levels, things that cannot be handled by a lower level. And I've said this 1,000 times on this podcast already with only 31 episodes. Things that cannot be handled. And some things can't be handled by families. Some things can't be handled by local communities or at the state level or whatever. They just can't. National defense is one of them. It's in the name. National defense cannot be handled by the family or by some other lower level institution. So, from the perspective of subsidiarity, national defense is appropriate to the national level, or in the U.S., the federal level. And so, of course, if we find ourselves in a situation where we have large multinational companies or something like that, then of course we would need some kind of national level antitrust power or something like that. That doesn't mean that we have to go along with everything else that, FDR thinks. That's just silly. If antitrust legislation is necessary, if it needs to be enforced, and isn't being enforced appropriately, then we can say that we should somehow find a way to ensure that it is enforced appropriately. But that's not concentration of power. Concentration of power, if it has any meaning whatsoever, would be the aggregation of power away from the local level to the national level or the state level where it doesn't belong. And so examples of this concentration of power would be things like federal government controlling education or heavily regulating it in some way, or the federal government being the primary being the primary organization in charge of caring for the poor or for the elderly. That is concentration of power that is not in line with Catholic social teaching and not in line with subsidiarity. So I think, we're always going to get slippery phrases from these types of people. And so this first one is a great example of that. So question 2, a pro-life social, this isn't really a question, it's just a statement. A pro-life social democracy would better accord with Catholic social teaching. That would be the best way to implement Catholic social teaching these days, not the, stereotypical 3 acres and a cow sort of thing. And of course, the problem there is that such a thing doesn't exist and probably never will. A pro-life social democracy. Where is one? Find me one. Anything that is a social democracy cannot be pro-life. It's just not going to happen. Because democracy is inherently an individualistic political form. It's all about that one person, your vote, one person, one vote. There is no room for the family as the basic unit of society when the culture is so just inculcated with a democratic ideology. So in addition to concentration of power issues that social democracy or democratic socialism, whatever phrase they're using, in addition to the concentration of power issues that violate subsidiarity, it also violates subsidiarity because inevitably the 51% always wants to give more power to those who will promise it to them. And so you will never get any kind of implementation of subsidiarity. Subsidiarity will never be respected in a democratic socialist or social democracy form of government. You will always get politicians willing to promise the moon, and then and then the public just following them with their votes. Secondly, I think this also, social democracy also violates solidarity as well. Social democracy is based on radical individualism, and it undermines solidarity. The whole point of social democracy or democratic socialism is that you have some kind of veneer of like fake solidarity, some kind of fake cohesion of the group that's enforced externally, that's enforced by the state. It's not genuine solidarity. Genuine solidarity comes out of the need for different roles within a family. And then, more broadly than that, a community that fosters the continuation and preservation of a family. And I'm not talking about the nuclear family, I'm talking about extended families too. Of course, those are fantastic. Those are what we really need. But democratic socialism or social democracy is not going to line up with that. And anyone who considers them a pro-lifer and a social democrat at the same time is has just lost their mind. Number 3, distributism goes against rather than with the grain of technological socioeconomic change. It is as doomed as Charles II and James II thinking they could re-Romanize England. I mean, okay, again, this is only a legitimate criticism if your conception of distributism and Catholic social teaching consistent policies are some kind of stereotype of what G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc said 100 years ago, which it's not. I mean, I'll link to other episodes that I've done on. I think my anti-distributism one would be the most sensible here. This is not about going against the grain of technological change or whatever. This is not TED posting. It's a coherent set of political principles designed to implement Leo XIII's ideas in the present day. And so the idea is that we look at timeless principles that the church has given us through the social encyclicals, especially those from Leo and Pius XI. So this is just a complete misunderstanding of what distributism is today, and it's really funny actually, because you get this caricature of it from these social democrat lefties and from the sort of economic libertarian types. It's kind of weird, kind of a weird alliance there. And finally, number 4, distributism assumes that sufficient power can be obtained by smallholders or by families or small communities or whatever to rein in these, evil plutocrat capitalists. Again, no, that's silly. Just because the Acton Institute and other market libertarian type groups have tried to redefine subsidiarity doesn't mean that I have to go along with their definition. Just because they have tried to redefine subsidiarity so that they can make it fit their ends doesn't mean that I have to go along with that. Subsidiarity means the lowest political level should handle the issue if it's competent to do so. Sometimes it's not, and that's okay. We should give preference for, we should assume that they can handle it unless it's obvious that they can't. So that just doesn't, this is just a non-argument in my mind. So throwing aside subsidiarity as the left wants, as the left wants us to do, right? The left wants us to throw away subsidiarity and just sort of install all power in some national or supranational body, which is suicidal, just moronic. That's no better, but there is a coherent way to implement subsidiarity along the principles of Catholic social teaching. And I have several episodes talking about specific issues, immigration, trade, labor. Just go back through some of these episodes. There's plenty of discussion of specific, reasonable changes that would push us towards Catholic social teaching, the implementation of Catholic social teaching. And I think, again, the issue is that some of us are committed to putting Catholic social teaching at the center of our politics and building our economic and political perspectives around Catholic social teaching. Other people aren't. They try to shoehorn Catholic social teaching into their own political ideology, and it doesn't work. And that's no less true among the Acton Institute and folks like that than it is among these social democrats who think that they're these integralists or whatever silly term they're using. So short episode. That's all the thoughts I have on this. I really think these are supposed to be, the person who sent them to me. The idea was that these were very difficult to address problems and stuff like this. And I think the issue is just that the framing is part of the issue is that the framing is just wrong. The idea of concentration of power and the understanding of subsidiarity. And the other is just that, these people haven't read anything about the sort of so-called right-wing implementation of Catholic social teaching for 100 years. So that's their problem, not mine. Thanks for listening, and thanks for those who are donating to us. Please, if you would consider a donation, that would be great. We're looking to expand our content offerings and stuff like that, and so hopefully have some news here in the coming months on those sorts of things. So please do consider that, and or at least please give us a rating on iTunes or whatever podcast app you're using. Thanks for your time. As you know, we could use more voices on the traditionalist right, and one of the best ways to do that is with a podcast. I've been using Anchor.fm for this podcast and for another podcast for over a year, and I've really enjoyed it. It's free, and it allows me to upload clips and also to record and edit. It also disperses all of my podcasts to all the major platforms, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. It also allows me to monetize and to collect donations. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. If you want to join me in being a voice for the traditionalist right, download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started. Thanks for listening to the Trad Dads podcast. If you enjoyed our show, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app and consider giving us a 5-star rating on iTunes. It really helps us out.